At one point, Richard Gere was all that Hollywood wanted: defiant, seductive, deadly, and handsome. After only one performance in American Gigolo, when he stripped it all to play an elite escort, he made millions with a smile, enthralled the world in Pretty Woman, and became a timeless sex icon. He was the epitome of desire, calm detachment, attention, and stardom. Richard Gere was more than simply a celebrity for more than 20 years. He was the epitome of masculinity. Then he disappeared. No controversies, no farewell announcements, and no more prominent jobs. People just discovered one day that he had departed America and Hollywood. The most startling query was not just why he went, but also if he took anything with him or nothing at all. Richard Gere had a vast real estate business that stretched throughout the United States for many years, ranging from luxurious apartments in the center of Manhattan to expansive estates in the suburbs of New York and a grand house in Connecticut, man-made rock streams, guest cottages, horse stables, private woodlands, and wine cellars. He used to live in America like a contemporary aristocracy. However, he later sold everything. Not a warning, no lengthy justification. Richard Gere left America, his birthplace, the place where he was once idolized by Hollywood, and where he once had everything. Nobody knew why. A guy who had amassed more than $120 million at the height of his renown, threw it all up to start again in an unexpected place. He didn't purchase a boat. He didn't start a business. He never relocated to California. He disappeared off the map of show business. So where does he now reside? Why did he go? For what reason did he abandon the superstar game? What, after all, is he actually clinging to? What is he secretly hiding that not many people are aware of? And why is it so different from what you think a Hollywood celebrity would be like? However, we must go back to the beginning to comprehend why Richard Gere left America, the limelight, and millions of dollars worth of property. A quiet youngster once thought that philosophy and music might rescue the world, not in Hollywood, but in a little village. On August 31, 1949, Richard Gere was born in a quiet village close to Syracuse, New York. No one in his family had any connections to the arts, and they were not affluent. His mother was a housewife, while his father sold insurance. It was a simple house, but it was rich with humanism, music, and discipline. A location that fostered Richard Gere, who was always a little out of sync with the crowd, and always thoughtful and introspective. Acting was not his first career. He excelled in gymnastics, practiced hard, and played the trumpet in high school. He was awarded a scholarship to study philosophy and drama at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 1967. A strange mix, yet one that hinted at a different kind of journey. He left school after 2 years because he didn't need a degree to live in accordance with who he was, not because he was frustrated. After dropping out of school, Richard Gere immersed himself in small-scale theater plays in New York and Seattle. He performed anonymous supporting parts, went through innumerable auditions, and lived with the peaceful belief that one day even silence will be heard. His portrayal of a death row inmate in The Killer's Mind, which he did while wearing a blindfold and using only his voice, was the first significant breakthrough in 1975. However, that exact constraint made his greatest weapon, a presence that came from inside rather than from his physical attributes, clear. He then gradually progressed through the parts in search of Mr. Goodbar, Days of Heaven, and Yanks. When John Travolta declined a dangerous and provocative job, however, the true door opened, and it fell into Richard Gere's hands. It was 1980, and American Gigolo was the movie. Gere lost his potential as an actor the minute he stepped into the film, nude, unrepentant, and playing a wealthy escort. He rose to fame, a symbol of calm intensity and subtle sensuality, of the contemporary guy who can turn the world to see without shouting. Richard Gere became more than simply a worldwide sex icon because to American Gigolo, it signaled the start of a period in which everything he came into contact with became famous. He featured in the seemingly unremarkable military romance An Officer and a Gentleman 2 years later, which became a global smash, winning several Oscar nominations and around $130 million at the box office. Although Richard Gere deviated from the norm, he became a vital face of 1980s Hollywood. He chose to perform Bent, a daring theater piece about homosexual prisoners in Nazi extermination camps, rather than reciting the ideal of the perfect gentleman. In addition to winning him the Theatre World Award, the part demonstrated that Richard Gere wasn't playing to get favor. From then he jumped into roles of moral strain and internal difficulty while acting to explore. He portrayed a dishonest police officer in Internal Affairs, 1990. The 1996 film Primal Fear, in which he battled a cunning adolescent criminal, helped make Edward Norton famous. In the 1997 action film The Jackal, he played an Irish-accented ex-IRA soldier who faced battle against Bruce Willis. However, if there is one film that made Richard Gere a household name, it is Pretty Woman 1990. At first he was reluctant to take the film. It was too reckless and too corny of a plot. He didn't say yes until he saw Julia Roberts and noticed that inexplicable spark. The outcome, income of $463 million worldwide, on a budget of $14 million. Richard Gere joined the ranks of Hollywood's eternal gentleman, and a pop culture star was created. He continuously achieved success in the 1990s, with films that struck a mix between profundity and popular appeal. Red Corner, Summersby, First Night, and Runaway Bride. From $2 million to $5 million to $13 million each picture, his salary increased gradually. Chicago marked the height of his creative career in the early 2000s. In a gloomy musical, he portrayed attorney Billy Flynn. With technique, depth, and the refinement of decades of practice, the performance earned him a Golden Globe and thrust him back into the public eye. The total: hundreds of millions at the box office, more than 50 films, and scores of unforgettable performances. The oddest thing, though, is that Richard Gere never received an Oscar nomination, despite the fact that many people think he should have. He portrayed a businessman in Days of Heaven and Arbitrage, where he struggled financially and morally. Maybe it was also a factor in his decision to leave. His career was complete enough to end with a head held high and didn't require a golden statue to establish its value. Richard Gere formerly had a net worth of $120 million and made millions of dollars a film during the height of his career. However, in contrast to many of his peers who lavished money on private planes, yachts, and homes in the Beverly Hills, he discreetly established a very other kind of empire. He bought an ancient inn in New York State and converted it into the Bedford Post Inn, a boutique hotel with 8 rooms tucked away in the woods where visitors may meditate, do yoga, and eat all organic food. No VIP lounges, no bar, and no EDM music. Just quiet and deep focused breathing. It was not a commercial endeavor, it was a declaration about life. Gere collaborated with Tenuta Sanfilippo to create Brunello di Montalcino, one of Italy's most esteemed wines, in Tuscany, Italy, where he once spent a whole afternoon strolling only to listen to the wind and the clinking of wine glasses. These bottles, which have the Bedford Post label, have a hint of loneliness, a sweet aftertaste, and a deep tannin. He once remarked, "I can't imagine a meal without wine," not because he was addicted but rather because he views wine as a component of a leisurely, contemplative, sensual rhythm. Richard Gere is in his 70s and has no time management skills. He routinely joins his wife in environmental, educational, and humanitarian endeavors, plays with his young children, meditates every morning, and takes walks in gardens. Although he doesn't have a strict routine, his life is clearly structured, not occupied, yet never empty. It's important to note that he made the decision to live that way while he was still quite wealthy, well-known, and capable of producing 10 more movies if he so desired. That lifestyle isn't noisy, but it's precisely that quietness that causes people to take a step back and view him in a new light, a man who chose to live as a genuine human being rather than as a Hollywood product. When a man chooses to live simply in the midst of millions of wealth, it's obvious that he has more than enough and doesn't lack anything. Richard Gere has a real estate map for more than 30 years that any A-list celebrity would be envious of. There was a commonality among the places he purchased, occupied, renovated, and ultimately abandoned. They served as much than just shelters. They reflected a philosophy of life. Richard Gere spent $1.5 million buying a home in Pound Ridge, New York, in 1987, just as his career was taking off. Not Malibu or Beverly Hills, but a completely isolated village about an hour's drive from Manhattan. He subtly grew it over the years by purchasing nearby properties, constructing 5 more guest cottages, and remodeling the 11 600-square-foot main house with 9 fireplaces, ponds, horse stables, and private riding routes. He spent more than 30 years living in isolation on the 50-acre estate, which resembled a private nature preserve, away from the media, Hollywood, and the commotion he had previously been a part of. Then he sold it in 2022, cost $28 million. A high figure. The way he left, however, shocked the people more. No goodbye, no pictures, no message, just a discreet transaction and a quiet listing. A few months later, he bought a historic mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, that had formerly belonged to Edie Brickell and Paul Simon, 2 legendary musicians. A beautiful English mansion, nestled in the heart of America. The 31-acre property included a 6-bedroom, 11-bathroom main house, a separate 3-bedroom guest house, an outdoor pool, a fish pond, rock streams, waterfalls, and wooded walks. Richard Gere, however, had more in mind than simply surviving. A vision came to him. He presented ideas to the newly established Canaan Planning Commission to turn 27 acres into an eco-agricultural farm that would raise bees, cultivate mushrooms, and perhaps even raise dairy goats. A self-sufficient paradigm that would allow him to live, work, and raise his kids in balance with the land, roots, and environment. Then, only 2 years later, in 2024, he sold it once more. At $10.75 million, the price is almost at break-even. They canceled the agricultural project. Everything was swiftly listed and moved in a covert manner. Nobody was aware of the reason. No failure, no controversy, and no public justification. Just one fact: he went out. America. Where was he going? Spain, not Provence or London, but Alcobendas, a peaceful neighborhood north of Madrid. Richard Gere spent €11 million for a home there that had a large garden, horse stables, a private wine cellar, and 34 acres, enough space for his 2 young boys to run about all afternoon without ever reaching a fence. There are only trees, wind, Spanish voices, and his wife's relatives close by, no fountains, sports cars, or round-the-clock security. He told Vanity Fair Spain, "My wife gave me 6 years to live in my world. I believe it's time for me to move into her home." Thus, in his 70s, Richard Gere left the United States, where he had previously achieved success and had everything, to start again in a different nation, in a house that no one could take pictures of, leading a life devoid of routine. Nevertheless, he retained a few properties for potential future visits, such as the apartment in Gramercy Park, New York, which he purchased for more than $2 million in 2016 on Jimmy Fallon's recommendation, or the Southampton home that was first bought for $6.5 million and then sold for an incredible $36 million. He spent 20 years living in another older flat, which is being rented out for $20,000 per month, like a discreetly marketed slice of recollection. It demonstrates that Richard Gere was spared the necessity to leave America. He just decided not to take it with him. The tale goes beyond living areas. His lifestyle is also reflected in the things he decides to drive, keep, and let go of. There are no ostentatious million-dollar supercars in Richard Gere's garage. However, there is the meticulous selection of a person who appreciates traditional beauty. He formerly had a Jaguar E-Type, which Enzo Ferrari said to as the world's most beautiful automobile. A Mercedes-Benz R107. An elegant coupe from the 1970s that represents durability and sophistication. Like himself, Gere also drove a 2015 Jaguar XK, which had a stylish exterior, wood trim inside, and a strong yet quiet V8 engine. Notably, he had a 2004 Lotus Esprit, a very little sensuous automobile with a low-slung design that he never required anybody to see. He never hesitated when it came time to leave ways, since they were all actual automobiles, not just props for magazine photo shoots. Richard Gere raised $31,000 for war victims in Ukraine in 2023 by auctioning off his 1999 Jaguar XK8 convertible, a straightforward move that demonstrates his expenditures without the use of a campaign, media, or hashtags. Richard Gere's most valuable item, however, is not a map and cannot be valued in monetary terms. He has discreetly accumulated and safeguarded this type of cultural and symbolic richness throughout the years. Non-profit groups that support religious freedom, healthcare, education, and the preservation of Tibetan culture in the face of globalization and political pressure from China include the Gere Foundation, Tibet House US, and the International Campaign for Tibet, of which he is chairman of the board. Because he is too political, he has been barred from big Hollywood blockbusters and banned from China for good. He hasn't given up though. He hasn't changed his position. He hasn't shown regret. Furthermore, Gere is a supporter of Survival International. He established an HIV/AIDS charity in India, providing medical facilities for women and children afflicted by the disease, and an organization advocating for endangered indigenous cultures. There are Tibetan Buddhist paintings, antique sculptures, and handwritten volumes of scripture on the walls of his study, items that no one would identify or bid on, instead of prizes. But they are riches to him. They increase in value but not in market value, based on his lifestyle choices. Richard Gere doesn't need to be wealthy to make an impression, but every piece of property he purchased, every home he constructed, every bottle of wine he made, every vehicle he owned, and every non-profit he covertly supported all demonstrate one thing: he never turned down money. He just made the decision to be wealthy in a manner that Hollywood could never replicate. Although Richard Gere altered his lifestyle, sold his home and exchanged property, the biggest transformation in his life had nothing to do with politics, real estate, or even age. It originated with a woman, and the little kids who now refer to him as Dad. Richard Gere is arranging flowers in a Madrid garden, with his 4-year-old son at a time when many Hollywood celebrities choose to live alone behind the walls of their past fame. This is a moment of such tranquility and surprise for people who used to know him as the icy, alluring lover on television. His current wife, Alejandra Silva, is a Spanish social activist and the daughter of Ignacio Silva, the former vice president of Real Madrid. Alejandra was born into a wealthy family and grew up surrounded by media, politics and sports, but she opted to live a quiet life and focus on helping others. In 2018, they were married in a modest ceremony in New York, when two very different cultures came together to discover a place where they both belonged, not for attention. In 2019, at the age of 70, Richard Gere gave birth to his first child with Alejandra, a son called Alexander. They had another kid the next year, in 2020, whose name is still unknown. He is a late parent, but never late in his love. Richard Gere, who used to be renowned for his independence and introspection, now spends the most of his time at home. He spent every meal with his two young boys, played with them, went for walks with them, and told them tales. No 24-hour nannies, no aides, and no division of labor between mom's and dad's jobs. His presence, more than his wealth, is what makes him a part of their early years. He once spoke the simple words, "Happy wife, happy life." He left America to be with his wife. He sold the land he had owned for 35 years for his wife. He moved residences, time zones, and his notion of success for his wife. And he also learned Spanish. Richard Gere formally relocated his family to Spain in 2024 after selling all of his possessions in the United States. They now reside full-time at a historic villa in Alcobendas, which is north of Madrid. It's now a place to start again as a regular guy, not just a getaway or a second house. "My wife gave me 6 years to live in my world," he said to Vanity Fair Spain. "It's time for me to move in with her." Richard Gere, however, lives for more than simply pleasure. He works with Hogar C., a non-profit organization that aims to eradicate homelessness in Spain in 5 years alongside Alejandra. Additionally, they back Sierra Amar in Mexico, a sustainable coastline restoration initiative where he invests, watches, and has a lasting impact rather than giving lectures. His family hosted 35 relatives for Christmas at their Alcobendas house at the end of 2024. Richard was the one who urged his wife to continue being the center of the family when Alejandra's grandma died away. She hosted Sunday lunches and set the table for 3 generations. He no longer views success as attending red carpet premieres or making millions of dollars as the star of a movie. Instead, it's a house full of kids laughing, a woman who genuinely gets him, and a peaceful sunlit morning without the need for an alarm. The most astounding aspect is that he has 3 children, each born during 3 distinct periods of his life. His kid with his ex-wife, Carrie Lowell, was born in 2000 and is named Homer. Richard Gere reared a quiet young man through the divorce and the years that followed. Homer stays close to his father, in spite of the disruptions. He frequently visits the new family and backs Gere's charitable endeavors. Richard Gere accepted parenting with the kindness of an experienced person, freed from the weight of his work or notoriety, alongside Alexander and the younger boy. He doesn't have to be the perfect example, all he has to do is be there, sufficiently near and sufficiently lengthy. Most likely, you wouldn't anticipate it. The man who formerly showed everything on TV to play a wealthy escort now leads a simple life, practices morning meditation, and takes care of his own garden in the backyard. However, everything has always been a shedding process for Richard Gere. He started Zen meditation in his 20s, studied under Zen master Kyozen Joshu Sasaki, and then visited Tibetan monks in Nepal. With initiation from the Dalai Lama personally, he officially became a Gelagpa Buddhist. He entered the world with a calmer, more determined demeanor as a result of his conviction rather than withdrawing into a monastery. "There's no time for anything else," he once stated. It's not a catchphrase. He lives by this idea in all he does, including his eating habits, lifestyle, and even his refusal of roles. Gere has consciously avoided blockbuster films, rejected conventional storylines, and resisted the sexualization of middle-aged men for the past 20 years. Rather, he played reflective parts in Time Out of Mind, Norman, Arbitrage, and The Benefactor, quiet, reflective performances that weren't hits but had depth. He produces his own veggies, pours his own wine, eats organic, does yoga, chooses to live a quiet life, and never uses his phone when speaking to someone. He thinks that the strength of our turbulent times lies in silence. This is also why his passion project, the Bedford Post Inn in New York, isn't a place to brag. Only 8 rooms, yoga, artisan wine, and a calm enough beat to let you hear your own thoughts are available. There is no bar, no EDM, and no VIP areas. He commissioned a special Brunello di Montalcino from Italy, under the Bedford Post label. This deep-bodied wine was served at several of his charitable functions. Not for a mass market, but for sharing, giving and enjoying a drink on a calm day with an old friend. Unlike most performers of his generation, he does not own a private plane, boat, business, or fashion company. He has retained his clarity of thought, sufficient kindness, and decisions that don't require justification. Richard Gere has made the decision to vanish just to be himself in a time where notoriety is mistaken for visibility. Stop treating yourself like an afterthought, as Richard Gere once remarked, and that is precisely how he has lived, not to make a statement, but to be fully there for what really counts. He no longer requires an Oscar or a main part,